Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of RE354, where I take old stories I've narrated and update into modern audio standards. This particular story is called Old Spacefaring Species Use Different Methods of Interstellar Travel. Magic, prayer, even sheer willpower. Humans were the only ones impure and insane enough to use controlled explosives. Written by crumjd. What the hell is wrong with your ship? Non-human common discipline isn't quite as good as the human equivalent. As I understand it, they never had to deal with the crackling early radios that informed our procedures. Sure, on most worlds, when a communication spell was first developed, it was the domain of a high priest or archmage, but it was clear. Still, I'd expected a slightly better introduction to a local traffic control net than a half-panicked voice asking a question that made no sense. This is Frontier Helm Control, all ship systems reporting nominal. To whom am I speaking? I glanced down at my board after I finished speaking. The ship systems are reporting nominal by not activating any shrieking klaxons or flashing lights. But with a few pokes and controls in front of me, I was able to project a little hologram of the ship's status. Everything was outlined in happy green.
No, I'm registering explosives at your aft end.
The speaker still didn't identify himself, and he still sounded panic. I reached out, grabbed the hologram, rotated around to view the back of the ship, and then zoomed in until I was looking at a fairly low-level systems. I wasn't as far down as I could go. The ship would happily report on status of individual circuit boards and breakers, but I was surely low enough that I could see anything that a local space station could see. Some components were haloed in light green rather than dark green, but that only meant that they were coming up on a server state. I drummed my fingers against the control board, mentally debating if I should launch a drone for an external view or if I should respond with everything's good a second time. On the one hand, whoever I was talking to was probably looking at me in a freaking scrying mirror and shouting into a pointy hat or something, so there was seriously no way they'd notice something that ship synthesis hadn't. On the other hand, I didn't want to end up in textbooks as an example of why only a jackass would ignore panicked warnings from traffic control. Then the hologram changed. A tiny icon shaped like an idealized hydrogen atom exited the back of the ship. A dozen lines lanced out at it, and a flare of fire blossomed behind the ship's pusher plate. Because I was paying attention, I felt the ship give a tiny shudder as we decelerated very slightly.
There it is again. I just saw a huge explosion behind your ship.
Sorry. You're registering our drive system control. All systems are nominal and everything is under control. This, at least, seemed to calm the alien traffic control operator down a tiny bit. I assumed that it was a male from the pitch of its voice. Translation spells are nicer than the computerized equivalent. They tend to give speakers roughly the voice the listener would expect given the nature of the speaker, even if the original speech was in the form of wild tentacle gesticulations and skin color changes via alien squid thing. This voice was sort of a nasal high, but definitely male. He at least listened to me this time.
You're telling me that your ship is deliberately firing off a series of huge fireballs. Is that safe?
Perfectly safe, Control. You're seeing laser-triggered fusion pulses. They're as clean as mother's milk. That wasn't strictly true. Even laser pump fusion makes some tritium. But it's not very hot, and the half-life is short enough that even if some mutant atoms end up in a planet's upper atmosphere, they aren't going to hurt anyone.
None of that translated.
The speaker's voice had become more nasal and somewhat accusatory, as though I had any control over what the spells could or could not translate.
But if that's your drive, then don't come any closer. I need to talk to someone about this.
The line cut off. Control, that's not how this works. The explosions are my brakes. I didn't get any responses. I should probably back up enough for a little context. Mankind made contact with extraterrestrial life for the first time when the Umalox, enormous crystalline spaceship, floated out of the sky and set down in the wilds of Alaska. There was a lot of turmoil in response to that, of course, but the strangest part came when they told us why they were on Earth and how they'd gotten there. Pure faith had carried them through space faster than a beam of light, and they were here to tell humanity of our divine mission. Tackling their technology seemed easier than tackling their belief system. So we set about examining everything they were willing to show us, absolutely certain that it was standard tech that they didn't understand and had thus reduced to superstition. Perhaps the ship had been built long before it had been piloted to Earth by a now fallen civilization. It was not. Long story short, it was not. The Umalarks allowed us to examine their technology in any way we requested. They knew what would happen before we started. We found nothing capable of doing anything in it, and as soon as we looked closely at it, the tech stopped functioning. Next, the Umalarks explained how the ship had been built, and indeed, they had built it themselves. The crystals that made it up were grown over the course of 3 generations, nurtured by the prayers of their entire civilization. A holy order of monks was founded to slowly shape the crystals into livable spaces and workable power focuses, and when the end of the construction was finally in sight, a dozen times as many traveler priests as was normally needed were taught the chants and hymns to fast travel and breathable air. The very best in that group was selected to pilot the ship, and only with this extraordinary effort were they able to land a ship on Earth, and then only by keeping it well away from most of the population. Then they explained humanity's divine mission. In the beginning, God created the universe. He created the races therein, and to them he gave the ability to adjust the rules of reality so that they might not perish under the iron fist of physics. The races of the vastness grew proud. They called their powers magic, and said that the wonders they worked were of will and mind rather than through faith. So, on a planet with more iron in its heart than any other, a race with cold iron in its very blood was born. To this race was given special magic, a magic that enforced the rules of the Creator. This race would humble the works of the Magi and test even the faithful. This time, God wasn't screwing around. We would assert the rules of reality wherever we examined something. Humans didn't get a choice in that. So that was our mission, to survive and travel. Of course, most people thought that it was a load of crap. There was even a contingent of people sufficiently contrary, or self-loathing, that said that we shouldn't travel the galaxy. However, the general reaction was, "There's a great big fantastic universe out there, and you're going to help us get to it? Well, praise the alien lord and pass the booster rockets." A new space race was on. It eventually produced 3 key technologies that gave mankind the stars: laser lifters, the Orion Drive, and the Orion 2. Laser lifters were the simplest. If you focus a sufficiently powerful beam into a thruster that's essentially nothing more than a durable black cup, then all of the air inside flashes to plasma, and the cup is tossed upwards. Do that a few thousand times, and the cup, as well as anything attached to it, is in space without the brutal constraints imposed by the device having to hold its own fuel with it. All of the research into lasers let us crack fusion. We were massively aided in this by having allies who could magically mine metallic hydrogen from gas giants. We probably could have built Orions with fission devices, but it was an almost perfect drive with laser-pumped pulse fusion. The Orion 2 wasn't related to the Orion Drive from an engineering standpoint, but... The radio clicked on again and brought me the still nasal and slightly frustrated-sounding voice of control.
Okay, I talked to my boss, who talked to his boss, who talked to the diplomatic affairs. For some reason, I've got to let your doom machine approach, so here you go. Park it here and try not to blow up. Well, not any more than you already are.
The hologram of the ship was replaced with a holographic representation of the parking orbit control wanted the Frontier to take up. I thought, not for the first time, that the translation spells used by most races really are amazing. Control probably put a voodoo doll of the Frontier into a scale model of the system, expecting a diagram to show up in my scrying ball or some such. But because of the translation spell, the information made it to me in a format that the ship's computer could interpret. Better yet, because the spell was acting on the communications and not my reception, the human anti-magic field couldn't turn it off. There was a sharp crack of static, and the hologram in front of me shifted to a bunch of juvenile squid aliens playing a game that looked a lot like dodgeball. One of those allies, a small and awkward one, even to my human eyes, was getting the worst of it. Several other beings were pelting it mercilessly with balls, and each of them was using more than one tentacle at a time. Then their image started to fuzz and break up. I quickly looked away from the hologram. Modern comms trading includes a fairly extensive section. I'm not thinking too hard about just how aliens who have never discovered radios are speaking to you. The human anti-magic field always gets a vote if you catch its attention. Let's see. The Basel override control had stuck me in his system's L2 point. L2 is way out past the moon, and it's gravitationally unstable. If I'd gotten a normal parking orbit, I could have shut off the ship's engines and taken some much-needed rack time. But oh no, because Control thought I was going to blow up, I was going to have to periodically correct the ship's position. On top of that, I suspected the Orion drive was too powerful for that work. It would be like trying to make a golf putt with a sledgehammer. So I would have to run our maneuvering thrusters way more than they were really designed for. I looked back down at the hollow. It was back to being a display of the Frontier's parking space. "Parking orbit acknowledged, Control," I said through clenched teeth. There was a long silence, and I thought maybe Control had wandered off without telling me for a moment. Then the line went live again, and Control spoke hesitantly.
So, why is your trip that important anyway?
I ran my tongue through my teeth, wondering just how to answer that. We were in the Von system. The Von were a race of mighty wizards of the sort that humanity was sent to humble and bring low. We've been doing a great job of that. The Von had a lot of desire for human consumer goods. Our technology filled niches their magic handled poorly, and anyone could use it without training. Yet all we could buy from them was raw materials. Their military was nearly useless against us because we shrugged off their most potent death magic like it had never been cast. They could throw a rock at us telekinetically or fire an arrow, but that was only if they caught us off guard. So a species with 100 planets to their name was having to normalize diplomatic relations with a single planet species, as though we were total equals. I wasn't exactly shocked the Von leaders hadn't publicized this meeting well enough for Control to be ready for us. I also wasn't going to give away their secrets. Just some trade negotiations. Control's only reply was to sigh so thick with annoyance that I actually started to feel for the guy. Embarrassing or not, the local traffic control facilities really should have been told that they were going to be dealing with a completely alien spaceship. No one ever thinks of the little guy. Again, I thought Control had signed off without announcing it, but he came back one last time. "Okay, I've got to ask. You're using fireballs to push yourself around in space, which is still nuts, but I learned back in school that only 1 or 2 really special spells can move something faster than light. Pyromancy definitely doesn't do it. So how did you make the interstellar leg of your trip?" The Orion 2 wasn't related to the Orion drive from an engineering standpoint, but they were philosophical and spiritual brothers. Humanity couldn't learn directly from the Umalak, but we could stand way over there with a particle detector while they used miracles to torment space-time. And the Umalak just loved to do that for us because they basically saw it as helping angels learn God's will. Eventually, we learned to make the GEC, a gravity-emitting circuit. Because the electroweak force is so much stronger than the gravitational force, it's possible to supercharge one of those until it very briefly becomes a singularity. If you toss such an artificial black hole in front of a ship, and lace enough GECs through the ship that the force gradient across it is even, so that you don't get spaghettified, you've got an FTL drive. Better yet, if you use a second artificial singularity inside the first, or a third in the second, or a fourth in the third, and so on, you get really, really fast indeed. It annoys physicists and mathematicians because they can't even begin to describe where the ship is after that bit of fuckery. But the tech tested as safe. At least, it's safe for human equipment and Earth life. It is not so safe for Umalak. We learned that when one of our high priests took a historic first ride on one of our holy vessels. They started screaming, and they didn't stop until a faith healer wiped their memory. Their whole memory. The high priest was left as little more than a mentally damaged infant, and everyone agreed that the cure was way better than the disease. The most sensible thing the priest said while it still had its memories was, "They can see me. They can see me. They can see you, but you can't see them. They can touch me, but they can't touch you. You can touch them. Save me. Save me. Save me. Will you save me?" The official human explanation is that the Omen block have some sort of subconscious connection to the normal universe that allows them to achieve the things that they can do. Taking them so far out of the normal universe causes a form of stress that can damage their minds. The official Omen Lock's explanation is that some sort of horrible thing is looking into our universe from the outside, and maybe they were wrong about just what humanity needs to do. Perhaps we aren't just supposed to annoy wizards. Maybe we need to fly around in high warp bands acting like border guards for reality. Their church is in a bit of a state of flux. I'd just spent a month in those warp bands, and the only danger I'd felt was boredom, so I don't know what to think. It is nice to imagine that my mind set a big brace down in the spine of reality itself, but it's kind of far-fetched. What I do know is that there's no way that I was going to explain any of that to Control. I'd end up with a parking orbit in a neighboring star system. Or maybe he would just tell me to go in for a landing on the system's sun. The force of will, I answered into the radio. Yeah, pure willpower. Everyone on the ship just wants to go faster than light really badly, and then we go faster than light.
Oh, well, good. At least you've got the sensible FTL drive. Geez, you should just get that working in system. Way better than those fireballs. Anyway, your approach vector is clear. Performer sending if you need anything. Control out.
End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.